Welcome everyone to our Lunch and Learn this month. This is with Charlotte. I actually met Charlotte at Charity Cheers Birmingham, which was really nice to meet you in person. And I said, I need to have you on for Lunch and Learn. And the next day you sent me an email and you gave me some really great ideas on topics. And this is a topic that is obviously very popular because we had great signups for this one, and it's all about leadership and influencing and creating support for volunteer managers and to really advocate for your volunteer program, which is something that we can all learn a little bit more on. So really appreciate your time. And yeah, I'll leave it to you to do your introductions and tell us a bit about yourself.
Perfect. Thank you, Mishka. I'm going to come back to introductions in a second, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all this afternoon. I do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to come and speak to me. So what we're going to be doing this afternoon is spending some time talking about leadership and influence and how you can create support for volunteering. So Mishka, can I have the next slide, please?
Should be good at this, but I'm not. Here we go. Yeah. There we go. Sorry.
Fab, thank you very much. So I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about my story. So when I was growing up, I was really exposed to the concept of volunteering. So whether that was watching my dad organise his local fishing matches, hearing my nanny talk really passionately about her role as a charity shop volunteer for the British Red Cross, my experience as a teenager of supporting my parents running their ice hockey team, giving up all of my weekends to support the match nights, or my first proper job where I was working for the police, working alongside special constables. Volunteering has always been a part of my life and what I do as a person. And this really inspired me to pursue a career in volunteer management. So I've been working with volunteers now over the last 19 years in a variety of different settings. So I've been privileged enough to work for the hospice sector, the disability sector, and cancer care in a variety of different sized organisations. So I've worked for some local and some medium and large national organisations. And throughout that time, I've had the opportunity to do lots of different roles and job titles that relate to volunteering. So my experience spans from the day-to-day management and coordination and support of volunteers, all the way through to being a strategic head of volunteering. And I'm now using these skills and experiences as a consultant. I think one of the things to reflect on in my journey as a volunteer manager is to say it's been a real roller coaster, and there has been some real highs and also some real challenging lows. So some of those highs have been the incredible volunteers that I've had the opportunity to meet and learn from. It never fails to amaze me, the incredible generosity of volunteers and how much they give to the organisations in which they volunteer. The other big highs within my career have been securing considerable investment and support for volunteering, which is one of the things I want to talk to you about today, as well as having the opportunity on a number of occasions to build my own volunteering teams. The flip side of that have been some of the lows. And if I'm really honest, some of that relates to my behaviour. So I found myself getting into a negative frame of mind, thinking and saying things like, well, why doesn't the organisation just understand how important volunteers are? Or how come I have to do everything myself? There's just not enough resources for volunteering. And when I look back through my career, there was a point where I found myself sharing this narrative with others, and I was really stuck in a rut with the operational demands of my role. I found it all quite overwhelming. It won't surprise you to know that having this kind of mindset really did nothing for my health or my happiness in my role. And actually what happened was that I came across to colleagues and others as being negative and really frustrated. And actually, that wasn't a good view to project on others in relation to being a volunteer manager. I think one of the things to say that despite the highs and the lows of my experience, one thing has always remained constant for me, and that has been my passion and my enthusiasm for volunteering. So when I think back to those highs of gaining investment and support for volunteering, I've looked back and I've really thought about what the things are that I did that helped me to achieve that. And that's what I want to share with you today, some of my learnings. So we're going to spend some time today talking through some tools, and a bit later on you'll have the opportunity to talk to each other and reflect on your own experience and speak in groups to consider your own impact in influencing and creating support for volunteering. Can I have the next slide, please, Mishka? Thank you. So to begin with, I want us to spend a little bit of time thinking about the concept of leadership. So I want to tell you about an experience I had a number of years ago. So I was very lucky to have the opportunity to go on a leadership and management training course. And on the first day of that course, one of the things that we explored was the difference between being a leader and a manager.
Oh dear.
And I had one of those incredible light bulb moments during that training where I sat there and I realised that actually I was the leader of volunteering across the organisation. And I was offering far more than just managing the day-to-day operational requirements of my role. And what I had was a really significant opportunity to impact the organisation and create real change. Now, just to give you a bit of context, when I went on this training session, I was a one-person team and I had the word manager in my role, but I was only managing myself really and my role within the organisation. So one of the big reflections from that day was that I realised that despite my job title and my perceived level within the organisation, I could actually take control of the situation and become a real leader within the organisation. This realisation really helped me to change the way that I perceived things. And then from that point on, I made a really conscious decision to change the way in which I thought about my role and my work. So when I was doing the preparation for today's session, I was trying to find a way of pulling together all of the learnings that I had. And actually, I came across this really lovely leaders map. I've taken it from a book called Lead, and I've put the reference onto the screen. But what I liked about it is that it gives you a really visual tool to be able to consider mapping out your journey as a leader and some of the things to consider. So I'm going to look at some of the specific areas that are outlined on the leaders map today. To accompany this session, I've also put together some worksheets and a work pack for you that have the tools that we're going to be talking about. So within that pack, there's also prompts for how you can complete the whole leaders map yourself when you go away from today's session. So before we move on, just one key thing to think about and remember is that any one of us can be a leader despite our role or our title. Can I have the next slide, please? So one of the first things I looked at when I was thinking about how to lead and create change and buy-in for volunteering was looking at the organisation strategy. So this is where I thought about what are the organisation's objectives and how does volunteering fit into that? And more importantly, how does volunteering enable delivery of the organisation's strategy? I'm sure when you look at this for your organisation, it will be really clear to pinpoint the role that volunteers play in enabling the delivery of the strategy. Now, I found being able to articulate the role that volunteers played in this was a real key influencer. So in my experience, one of the things that chief executives are really, well, their role as a chief executive is to make sure that the charity is achieving its mission. And I felt that my role was to really spell out the role that volunteering could play in supporting delivery of that organisational strategy. So, for example, you might want to talk about the value that volunteers are adding to your beneficiaries, the way that volunteers are helping you to reach more people, the development of new volunteering roles. Those are all opportunities that you could map out onto your leaders map. The other thing I found really helpful in terms of influencing was providing a slightly different view on the flip side. And I used it as an opportunity to be able to educate senior leaders on the risk of not investing in volunteering, given the external environment. So, for example, if recruitment is very challenging, it becomes far more important to retain the current volunteers that you have. To do that, we need to offer a really great volunteer experience. But if we don't have the resources and the skills needed within the organisation, then that becomes a real risk. So there's a risk section as well on the leaders map. And thinking about the risks of not investing in volunteering is something that can really help you to influence. Now, we may sit there in our heads and know really clearly how volunteering helps the organisation to meet its strategy. But actually, our role as leaders is to make sure that we are talking about it and shouting about it from the rooftops. Can I have the next slide, please? The next area I considered was around what the vision for volunteering was for my organisation. So for this, there were two key questions that I asked. The first one was around what was our big aspiration for volunteering? And the second was, what was the change that we wanted to see happen as a result of involving volunteers? Now, you may have noticed on the leaders map at the start, the vision was probably the biggest box within that, which just shows the importance in leadership of having a vision. What having a vision for volunteering enabled me to do was to really clearly understand what I was aiming for. Developing the vision in the first place gave me an opportunity to work with people across the organisation to get their involvement in what that looked like. And in turn, that then helped them to buy into what the vision for volunteering was for the organisation. And then once we had a vision for volunteering, it was my opportunity to align all of the work that I was doing to make sure we were going to meet that vision. What it really helped me to do, though, was to make some much better choices about what I was able to spend my time doing. So with my vision, I used it as a guiding star that really helped guide me in my resource allocation between where I was spending my time on things operationally versus strategically. I really found that going through the process of developing a vision helped to show the organisation that I was the strategic thinker and also helped to increase my influence. Can I have the next slide, please? The next area I looked at was thinking about who I needed to influence. So this is all about looking at your stakeholders. So the Oxford Dictionary defines a stakeholder as a person with an interest or a concern in something. And this is all about getting people on board. So there are a number of things that I thought about here. So firstly, who were my stakeholders in relation to volunteering? When I knew who they are, I thought about what was their interest in volunteering? What was their motive around volunteering? I considered who within the organisation was already really supportive of volunteering and was an ally and somebody that I would be able to work alongside. And then I identified those colleagues that I needed to engage with a lot more and maybe in different ways. Now, the learning I found really valuable here was to consider about how I worked alongside these different stakeholders and adapting my approach. So different things appeal to different people. So for example, some people love storytelling. So those were the people that I would go to with my big concepts, ideas, and visions for the future of volunteering. I'd talk to them about the difference and the value that volunteers brought, and I'd share all the stories that I could. There are other people that may be more interested in things like governance and process. And when I was working with those colleagues to influence them, I would use communication that talked about providing them with reassurance about how we were going to make sure our volunteer programme was safe and inclusive and that we had the right processes in place to support volunteering. And then there are other people where things like facts and figures are really important to them. So for those colleagues, I may have focused my narrative more on how many volunteers we have, how many people are supported by volunteers across the organisation, what our return on investment is in relation to volunteering. One of my key learnings here was actually it was for me to adapt my communication style and approach based on the person. And that really helped me to speak their language and be able to influence them more effectively. Once I had a really clear understanding of who my stakeholders were, their interests, and what I needed to do to engage them, I mapped those out and created a plan for how I was going to work with those people. One of the most important things I found about working with stakeholders was really having the opportunity to properly collaborate with people and to hear a really diverse range of thoughts and views. And I personally found this a really great way to challenge and stretch my own thinking in relation to volunteering. Could I have the next slide, please? So on this slide, I've summarised a model around control and influence. And I think when I look back on my own experience of how I've managed to influence and gain support for volunteering, this has probably been my biggest learning and reflection point. And it was a real turning point for me in how I mapped out the work that I was going to do and the approach that I was going to take when I thought about it in relation to this model. So some of you may have heard of this before, but it's called the model of control and influence, and it's taken from a book by somebody called Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'll just talk through what that model looks like. So it's made up of 2 circles. So the circle on the outside is the circle of concern. Now, these are all those things that are going on around you. So they might be things like changes in the government, the state of the economy. It could be the way that somebody was driving on your way to work that morning. It could be things that your colleagues do or how they're reacting to what you're saying. However, the key thing to understand about this outer circle is that there may be very little that you can actually do about these things as they are outside of your influence. So once you're able to map and understand those, what you can realise is that devoting your energy in some of these areas can be a waste of your time and energy. So in the middle, there's a smaller circle of influence. Now, this might be smaller, but what I did here was I really thought about the things that I could do something about. So in this model, it suggests that it's really key to focus your energy on the things that you can influence to help you to make changes. And actually, if you focus on those things within the smaller circle, then your influence will increase. And what then happens is others will see you as more effective and your influence gets wider. It's important to note that the opposite is also the case if you focus your energy into the things that you can't change. Because what this does is it drains your energy and other people may start to see you as negative and critical. So proactive people focus on what they can do and what they can influence. Now, I touched on this right at the beginning in my story. And looking back, what I realise is that I spent years of time focusing on things that were outside of my control. Those were the lows that I referred to. I felt very negative. I was very despondent. I was focusing on all the things that I couldn't do. But when I realized that there was an opportunity to really focus my work on things that I could do and make a difference with, it really, really helped me to take control of things. And what I found was that when I started to work on the things that I put inside my circle of control and influence, that really helped me to gain support for volunteering and the work that I was doing. Can I have the next slide, please, Mishka? Fab, thank you. So I've done loads of talking, and we wanted to give you the opportunity to get to have a conversation with each other about your own experiences of leadership and influencing. So I mentioned earlier that I've created a resource pack for you. So Mushka's going to put a link to the resource pack into the chat for you to be able to access. And then we're going to put you into groups for 10 small groups, maybe sort of 4 or 5 people for 10 minutes to have a conversation about your own reflections. So what I'd suggest is that you introduce yourselves, maybe consider some of the things that I've spoken about this afternoon, and think about which areas of leadership and influencing you might like to work on, or some of the models that I've suggested that you might want to try out. And also, I'm really conscious that there is so much experience within the room as well. If you have any great experience or top tips that you have of leadership and influencing, then we'd absolutely love to hear those. So please share those with your colleagues. And it would be amazing if when we come back into the room that we're able to share those in the chat, because that's what today's all about, learning from each other. Hi, everyone.
Sarah, how was your group?
Yeah, it was good. It was lovely having a mixture and meeting Alina that's obviously international on as well. I think that was really great to give some different views. But no, it was lovely speaking to people and sort of having some similarities that we were thinking and highlights that we'd picked up. So yeah, it was a good session.
Great.
Are people still coming back, Mishka? Have we lost people?
Yeah, no, people are still coming back. The room closed 60 seconds ago. It gives you 60. Yeah.
It's so abrupt, isn't it? The way it like cuts you off in your conversation and
Yeah.
brings you back in cyberspace. Oh yeah, here we go.
Exactly.
Welcome back as you're rejoining.
Ian, how was your group? Any good conversations come out of it?
Yeah, no, there was 3 of us. There was Louise in the group, but I think she might have been the lady that was stuck on a train and couldn't join. So there was 3 of us. No, and I think we just sort of came to the conclusion that we're all very hard on ourselves in this sector.
Yeah.
And we've brought things forward, and we've spoken to SLT and management and things like that, and introduced things, and we don't necessarily give ourselves enough credit for things that we've introduced. And that's so but I've been on these calls before, and I was saying there that I'm a team of 1, and we're quite a largish organization compared to some others, so it can be quite isolating sometimes, so it can be difficult. So Claire was in our group and was saying she can sort of bounce ideas and work closely with other parts of their team, but I don't have that luxury, unfortunately. So I just feel that the one thing I want to sort of take away from today is being a bit more sort of assertive in terms of pushing volunteering towards SLT and people like that, and trying to get round the table a bit more with senior people. But no, we were just having a sort of a general chat there about you know, how sometimes we do find that we've introduced things, and we just don't sort of recognize that because you're so busy doing your day-to-day stuff that you forget sometimes, you don't reflect. I think reflection is something I think we all need to do in this sector, because we do bring things in, and then you're on to the next thing. So if it's not volunteers week, it's befriending week, or it's something else, or it's whatever day it is. So you're always moving on to the next thing. So I think that's something else I want to take from today, sort of be able to, and even these sort of forums and these webinars and stuff, I write up the notes and I get the email with all the slides and everything, but I probably won't look back on it for another 3 or 4 weeks. And maybe
Yeah, I
that's
think yeah, no, that's a good insight. I think the thing with volunteering is I don't think there's like any KPIs. Like with fundraising, you can very much say, okay, like I've raised X amount and great, pat on the back, you've reached the target. Whereas volunteering, it's very hard to measure impact. So you can't really be like, oh, I did X, Y, Z. So I think definitely shout about, the different volunteering stories you have. I was just on a call with a volunteer manager who was doing one-off volunteering, and this one person came in and we overheard a conversation saying that they're looking for new nappies because they work for a baby bank. And this one volunteer who just came off on like one time was like, oh, I used to work at Huggies. I can get you like cases of nappies for free. And really, if you just measure her hours, she just came for, a couple of hours to volunteer. But the impact and the money saving that happened from just that one conversation with that one volunteer. So I think shout about a lot about what you do and these stories that you have with volunteers. Charlotte, I'm going to give it back to you. Do you want me to share the slides?
Yes, please. So we'll move on. So just while Mishka's sharing the slides, if you do have any, like that was some really great advice there that you shared, Ian, about not being so hard on yourself and making sure you're doing reflection and celebrating your successes. If there are any other tips that people want to share, then please do so in the chat. And I'm going to end by sharing some more sort of top tips with you. So it's just the second to last slide. Perfect. Thanks, Mishka. So these are some other things that I discovered along my journey that I just wanted to share with you that I thought you might find valuable. So one of the key things that really helped me in my leadership and influencing journey was the self-awareness. So what I knew about myself. So it was really valuable to me to understand what my strengths, what my superpowers were really, and what my limitations were. That just gave me confidence in myself and my ability to be able to influence and push forward the work that I was doing. One of the other things that I spent time doing was considering what my personal values were. And when you look on the leaders map, you'll notice that values, again, is something which is an important thing to reflect on. And what that helped me to do was to consider how my personal values linked in and aligned with that of the organisational values. I found that it was really important for me to challenge my mindset. So where I had a particular set mind in relation to ways that volunteering could be done, being more open-minded was really valuable. I think one thing just to share is that going on any kind of journey in terms of making change and leadership, knowing myself and things about myself helped me to really remain resilient. Leading can be really challenging, so having that self-awareness was really valuable. The other thing that was really important to me was about adapting approach. So there were times where things I was trying to do just weren't working, and rather than just ploughing on, which I may have done in the past, I stopped what I was doing. I took a step back and I reassessed and thought of a different way around. Sometimes it's really helpful to understand some of the internal power structures that go on within your organisation and how to influence those people around you. One of the things that I found is that it wasn't always the most senior person that I needed to influence, but actually those that sat around them. Now, Ian, you've actually just touched on this next top tip, but I'm going to expand on it in a little bit more detail. So the other thing I found invaluable was about raising the profile of volunteering. And there's kind of two parts to this. So the first one is how I raised the profile of volunteering internally. So I took every opportunity that I could to go and speak to colleagues about volunteering. I attended loads of team meetings. I was able to get a place on the corporate induction to make sure that volunteering was included. I developed training for colleagues on how to work and manage volunteers, and this really helped to raise the profile of volunteering. I worked really closely with line managers to understand what their challenges were and their needs were in relation to volunteering. I did all those things that Ian just talked about in terms of celebrating success of volunteering and making sure that I was sharing case studies of best practice. And that really helped to raise the profile and shout about what we were doing in volunteering. And then the other way to raise the profile of volunteering is to do that externally. So I guess one of the great things about a lunch and learn like this is that we've got the opportunity to network with colleagues and learn from each other. And I've always found that colleagues are really generous with their knowledge and what they're able to share with each other. So using things like social media to talk about the things that I was working on, the pieces of work I was proud about, the events I was going to and the things I was learning from was a really great way for me to share what we were doing within the organisation, but also to build my own personal brand and so that people had a bit more of an understanding of me and who I was. There's also opportunities to raise a profile of what you're doing in volunteering, presenting at events like this or going to conferences or maybe blogging about things that you do with volunteering. Now, you may wonder what doing all that the benefit of that has for the organisation. But actually how that helped me was that when more senior colleagues asked me what was going on in the voluntary sector or what others were doing, it meant that I had connections and I had information that I was able to call on. It really validated some of the great work that we were doing as an organisation internally. And we even had other charities coming to us and asking how we were doing things with volunteering, which really helped to showcase that the skills and experience we had internally within the organisation. And that helped to gain the respect of colleagues. We've already heard today that some people are in one-person teams. That has been my experience through a lot of my career. So I think one top tip I would have is to build a support network around you. There will obviously be people within your organisation that can provide that level of support. But one of the things I've found most valuable is investing in relationships with colleagues across the sector. When I found things challenging, it was always very comforting to know that I had people that I could reach out to who were able to listen and offer advice and guidance. So building a support network is really important. Having a clear action plan for volunteering is something else that I found really valuable in helping me to influence and lead. It really clearly showed what would be delivered and allowed us to measure our progress against the goals and have something tangible to share across the organisation about the progress we were making. And then my last tip is around learning. So there are lots of things around the transactional best practice of volunteering. So we all need to know how to do volunteering well. But in honesty, one of the things that I've found most valuable in developing my skills has been developing and investing in myself as a leader. So these are skills that I've talked about today that I've been able to demonstrate that have helped me to develop volunteering within my organisation, but have also really helped me as an individual to develop my career and look at different roles and things that I might want to do in the future. So I found that developing my skills in leadership has really enabled me to influence real change. And it really helped me to move my work from being very transactional to transformational for volunteering across the organisation. So those were my top tips. In the time that we've got left, I'd be really keen to hear any other reflections from colleagues that you might want to share, any questions that you have. So yeah, I'm happy to sort of open up for discussion.
Sorry. Sarah wrote about the AVM do some peer support network groups in the areas you don't have to be a member of AVM to join, and it's a great way to connect. Sarah's part of the East Midlands group.
Yeah, and just to say, they tend to be face to face. I think at the moment I've noticed Birmingham, Southeast, East Midlands, North West, and I think they've got a Scotland one coming up as well. I think they've just starting to trial and develop them out, but the East Midlands was one of the first one. But there's some great great people on there and great local contacts. So yeah, definitely worthwhile looking out, especially if you work alone, which I know a lot of us do. Maybe sometimes at home, it's just nice to have that face-to-face contact sometimes.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Sarah.
Volunteero does charity cheers, so we go around, which is where I met Sarah and I met Charlotte, which was very exciting. We go around the UK to different cities, and we just have a bit of a laugh. Next ones are in Brighton, Cardiff. We're doing London again, which will be very exciting. So yeah, keeping it the face-to-face is such an important part.
Well, if budget allows, Mushka, you'll have to come over to Belfast.
Oh, I'd love to. I'm actually going to the Volunteer Island conference in April.
I've never gone. I've done the virtual one, but I've never gone in person just because of the cost and the travel, and I have caring responsibilities, unfortunately, so I can't really be away during the day for too long. So, but yeah, no, it'll be a good one. I work with Stuart quite a lot down there.
Brilliant. Yeah, Stuart's lovely. Does anyone else have anything to add? Oh, Sarah, thank you.
So I know sometimes I take over, Mushka, but one thing, Charlotte, you said right at the start there, we've got manager or coordinator or whatever in our titles and everything, but we need to move out of that little box and become these leaders, and especially if we are on our own, we're the only ones that are going to be able to push for volunteering and get it further up the ladder, as it were. So that even before we got into the whole afternoon, that was the one big thing that I've taken away from today.
Oh, I'm really pleased, Ian. I understand the pain of being a one-person department, but it really, I've explained my light bulb moment. It really changed how I worked and what I was able to achieve within my organisation. I never ever thought I would get any support for volunteering, and I was able to. So yeah, don't give up.
Love that. Yeah, so I think this is where we probably leave things. Really thank you so much, Charlotte, for your time. That was really valuable, and we had some great conversations on it. This recording will go out to anyone who signed up, and I will include all our next free events too, with obviously our volunteer managers community group too. So thank you everyone for attending, and even bigger thanks. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for your time. Really do appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Lovely to meet you.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.